Today, we're going to take a look at Uncle Todd versus EVGENY PRUDNIK at East versus West. I think that Todd always gives us really good example matches of how you can potentially isolate your opponent's arm in an alternative way. So getting into this, firstly, we're going to see this is just round 3 because due to copyright rules, we're only allowed to look at one match on the East versus West cards, at least the ones that are a little bit more recent. And we're going to see a slip, and we're going to go to straps. Todd is very committed to the outside lane in this match. The last time these guys pulled, we saw Todd try to hook Prudnik 1 or 2 times in a row, and then at the end, he ends up trying to go to straps and trying to top roll. But in this match, we see him committed to the top roll immediately from the get-go. And what we're going to see in this third round is maybe the best example of how to isolate Prudnik's arm, how to isolate his bicep, even though Todd is unable to get his wrist mint. So his initial strategy, the first time he pulled Prudnik, he wanted to isolate that bicep, and he was going to do that by getting the match into a hook. So he wanted to bend his wrist forward. He wanted to flex his wrist or cup his wrist in and turn the match into a hook. But one way that you can also isolate your opponent's bicep is by bending your wrist in the opposite way. And that's what we're going to see Todd do here. Todd is going to get a good enough strap connection that even when his wrist goes back, he's still going to be able to use his lat drag and his side pressure, and it's going to directly attack Prudnik's bicep. So notice immediately off the go, Todd rolls out, he pronates, and his wrist cracks back basically immediately. He goes straight to the back of the pad, and you can see Prudnik is putting a lot of that effort into cracking Todd Hutchings' fingertips or into cracking his wrist back. But the thing is, Todd is totally fine with that. He knows his wrist is going to go back, but as this is happening, Todd is also putting pressure into Prudnik's fingertips. He's maintaining that back pressure through his thumb. So he's putting Prudnik in an awkward position where he can't really cup. And then he's trying to top roll, but he's kind of already top rolled Todd. And so there isn't really much more for him to do as far as his back pressure goes. He's not able to take anything from Todd because Todd is totally fine with giving that away as long as Todd maintains his pronation, his back pressure, and his side pressure, and he's at the back of the pad. He's going to be isolating Prudnik's bicep and opening this. So Prudnik is on his elbow flexor to take Todd's wrist, but once the wrist goes, he's still on his elbow flexor. And now Todd can rip through that with bigger muscle groups. He can use his side pressure and his lat drag to rip through that bicep. So essentially what has happened is instead of Todd isolating Prudnik's bicep by getting in a hook, he's isolated Prudnik's bicep by letting his wrist crack back. And this is kind of an interesting concept. It's a little bit hard to think through maybe initially, but once you kind of see this playing out more and more so, you'll see people like TODD HUTCHINGS, Jerry Kadaret, Gennady Kvigvenya using this strategy to isolate their opponent's bicep when maybe they're in a match that's impossible for them to actively bend their wrist. And what we're going to see is Todd's going to start to roll down to the pad now, and you can see him opening Prudnik's bicep angle. And once you get here against Uncle Todd, it's probably all over. You can see at this point, Todd even has the high knuckle position. He's in a way holding on to Prudnik, but he's also not. He's kind of allowing the strap to hold on for him. One of the reasons that you normally don't want to hold on in an arm wrestling match is because you're kind of exposing your own wrist. But if you're letting your wrist flop back, then kind of the same motion you would use to hold on, or to quote unquote hold on like Devin Larratt talks about, this could actually be good because now you're going to be able to use your lat drag against your opponent's bicep. But all of this is only possible if you're someone who is comfortable pulling without your wrist flexion. If you are able to pull without your wrist flexion, you're going to unlock all kinds of access to moves like this, like what Todd Hutchings does, moves like what Michael Todd does, where he can lat drag while top rolling. His wrist goes back, but he doesn't care because he's isolating his opponent's bicep, or even potentially something like what Jerry Kadaret or Kamil Jablonski does, where they bring their shoulder forward as they allow their wrist to crack back, and they're able to isolate their opponent's bicep in this way. But from this point, it's only going to be a matter of time. Todd's side pressure, his awkward broke back wrist side pressure versus Prudnik's kind of awkward broke back wrist side pressure is just not going to be anywhere close. And Todd is going to be able to take this one. It's just a matter of time. And this may have been actually a massive elbow foul now that I look at this in slow motion. But either way, I think he was going to get this pin. You can see him rolling down to the pad, and he's going up and over the top of Prudnik, kind of in this strange way. His hand is higher than Prudnik's, even though Todd's wrist is more cracked back. But this is because Todd's side pressure, his rotation, is dominant over that of EVGENY Prudnik. And Todd finally is able to get the head rub against EVGENY Prudnik, taking this one 3-0. He ended up hooking him in round 2. And then in the third and final round, we do see this Todd roll once again, where he's able to isolate Prudnik's bicep using his side pressure, using his lat drag, using his back pressure, even though he never bent his wrist. And notice the distance in the straps. Firstly, notice how low Todd gets his strap. This is very important. If you're going to do a move like this, you want your strap on your wrist to be as low as possible, but also the strap on your hands to be as low as possible. And this is really going to help when you're putting this pressure into your opponent's bicep. You're going to have a connection. The strap is essentially holding on for you. And that's what we see here with Todd. If the strap was significantly higher on his hand, this would make it a little bit difficult, or a little bit more difficult rather, for him to use his arm power versus Prudnik's arm power. But what happens when you pull straight back and sideways, if you have a good strap connection, even if the strap is a little bit loose upon the start of the match, there's going to be a point where you drag far enough and the strap completely tightens. And as soon as the strap tightens, as soon as it is taut, there's no slack. And you have a good connection like this, you have now gained access to your opponent's bicep. And the hand positioning really doesn't even matter. Todd's wrist could be bent, it could be flopped back. And if you think about it, having your hand in a looser position can actually be an advantage in a situation like this, because when you let your hand go to a certain extent, when you kind of let your grip go a little bit, you're actually giving the strap room to tighten down, and to tighten down on your opponent's wrist and your arm, where you're going to have access to that bicep. If there's a looseness in the strap, the only way you're going to access your opponent's bicep is through your own hand control. You're going to have to either bend your wrist or get some kind of high knuckle position where your opponent holds on, and that's the way that you're going to access their bicep. But as soon as the strap becomes rigid, as soon as it becomes tight, it locks down on your opponent's arm, and your arm, like we see here from TODD Hutchings, it really doesn't matter what's going on in your wrist. It can be flopped back, it can be bent, it can be dumped. It doesn't matter as long as you have a strong strap connection. That is probably the most important thing to giving yourself access to your back pressure and your side pressure and your lat drag, no matter what else happens. So hopefully this does a good job. I think TODD Hutchings always does a good job of showing how you can get access to your arm power without your wrist. And you need to get a really low, a really tight strap, and be confident enough to fire back hard enough and fast enough to where you can get that strap to tighten before your opponent can pin you through your fingertips. So hopefully this is helpful. I'll see you guys in the next video.